Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. When you think of ancient Rome, what comes to mind? Mighty legions marching across continents, the Colosseum, emperors in purple robes. It's an epic image, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and it certainly wasn't born an empire. In fact, for a long time, Rome was just one small, gritty city-state among many, fighting for its very survival in a tough neighborhood. Today, we're going to rewind the clock, way back to the very beginning, to explore the brutal, make-or-break conflicts that forged Rome's destiny, its wars against its powerful neighbors, the Etruscans and the Latins. This isn't a story of conquering distant lands. This is a story of a street fight for control of its own backyard, a fight that would determine if Rome would rule the world or be wiped off the map entirely. The early Roman Republic, around the 5th century BC, was a fragile thing. It had just thrown off the yoke of kings, some of whom were Etruscan, and was trying to figure out this new thing called a republic. To the north lay Etruria, a confederation of wealthy, sophisticated city-states. The Etruscans were masters of engineering, art, and trade. They had a powerful military and had dominated this part of Italy for centuries. To the south were the Latins, Rome's own kin. They shared a language, a culture, and religious rites, but family didn't mean friends. The Latin League, a coalition of about 30 towns and tribes, saw Rome's growing ambition not as a source of pride, but as a direct threat to their own independence. So, Rome was literally caught in the middle. A scrappy underdog surrounded by suspicious relatives and a former overlord who was too happy about being kicked out. Every harvest, every trade route, every border was a potential flashpoint. For these early Romans, war wasn't a choice. It was a constant, terrifying reality. One of the most legendary conflicts from this era was the war with the Etruscan city of Veii. This wasn't just a battle, it was an epic, 10-year siege. Think of it as the Trojan War of early Rome. Veii was a powerhouse, rich, well-fortified, and just a dozen miles from Rome. For a decade, the two cities were locked in a death struggle. Roman soldiers, who were just citizen farmers, had to stay in the field year-round for the first time ever. This was a huge strain on their families and farms back home. The story, as told by the Roman historian Livy, is filled with heroism and desperation. Finally, the Romans turned to a brilliant general named Marcus Furius Camillus. The legend says he ordered his men to dig a tunnel under the walls of Veii. They supposedly emerged right inside the temple of Juno, just as the king of Veii was performing a sacrifice. The shock was total. The Romans poured out of the tunnel, opened the city gates, and Veii fell. The city was sacked, its territory absorbed, and its wealth flooded into Rome. The fall of Veii in 396 BC was a monumental turning point. It doubled the size of Roman territory and sent a clear message to everyone in Italy. Rome was a force to be reckoned with. But just as Rome was celebrating its greatest victory, disaster struck. From the north, a new terror emerged. The Gauls, a massive Gallic warband led by the chieftain Brennus, swept down into Italy. They weren't interested in building cities. They were interested in plunder. The Roman army, perhaps overconfident after Veii, met them at the Battle of the Allia and was utterly annihilated. It was one of the most shameful defeats in Roman history. The Gauls marched on and sacked Rome itself. The city was burned, its people scattered. The Romans who held out did so in the last defensible spot, the Capitoline Hill. The famous story goes that the Gauls tried a sneak attack at night, but the sacred geese in the temple of Juno started honking, alerting the guards and saving the citadel. Eventually, the Romans paid a huge ransom in gold to get the Gauls to leave. As the gold was being weighed, the Romans complained the weights were fixed. Brennus, in a display of ultimate contempt, threw his own sword onto the scales and roared, "Vi victus, woe to the vanquished." This humiliation was burned into the Roman psyche. They vowed to never, ever let it happen again. This near-death experience fundamentally changed Rome. They rebuilt their city, but this time with massive, formidable walls. More importantly, they reformed their army. The old Greek-style phalanx was too rigid. They began developing the more flexible system of maniples, smaller units that could adapt to different terrains. This military innovation, born from disaster, would become the key to their future conquests. With their city secured and their army improved, the Romans turned their attention back to their southern neighbors, the Latins. The other Latin cities had watched Rome's struggles with a mix of fear and opportunism. They saw a chance to break free from Roman influence once and for all. This led to the Great Latin War, which broke out in 340 BC. This was a civil war. In a way, was Latin against Latin, fighting with the same weapons and tactics. The battles were incredibly fierce and personal. Roman commanders had to enforce brutal discipline to keep their men from breaking ranks against their own cousins. There's a story of a Roman consul's son who, against orders, charged ahead and won a duel, but was executed by his own father for disobeying. That's how high the stakes were. The Latin War was the final decisive contest for the control of central Italy. Rome, with its renewed military and unyielding determination, was victorious. But what they did next was an act of political genius. Instead of destroying the Latin cities as they had Veii, they created a new system. Some cities were granted full Roman citizenship. Others were given partial citizenship with limited rights, or were bound to Rome through treaties, required to supply soldiers for the Roman army. This was a revolutionary model. Rome didn't just conquer, it incorporated. It turned former enemies into partners and future soldiers. This strategy of assimilation gave Rome a massive, ever-expanding pool of manpower that no other city-state could match. They had learned from the Gallic sack that isolation meant vulnerability. Now they were building a network, a confederation with Rome at its unbreakable center. They weren't just a city anymore, they were becoming the heart of a nation. So, let's pull it all together. The early wars of the Roman Republic were not grand campaigns for glory. They were a desperate struggle for existence. The 10-year war against Vigia taught them endurance and showed them the rewards of total victory. The catastrophic sack by the Gauls taught them humility and forced them to innovate militarily and fortify their home. And the Latin War taught them the most important lesson of all, how to turn defeated foes into loyal allies. Each conflict was a crucible, burning away weaknesses and forging a stronger, more resilient state. The Romans who endured these wars developed a unique character, a blend of grim determination, pragmatism, and an absolute refusal to quit, no matter the cost. It was on the anvils of Vigai and the ashes of the Gallic sack that the iron will of the Roman legionary was truly forged. Without these brutal early struggles, without the lessons learned fighting the Etruscans and the Latins, the Roman Republic would have been just another forgotten city-state, a footnote in the history of Italy. Instead, these conflicts laid the foundation, brick by bloody brick, for the empire that would one day rule the known world. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this deep dive into early Roman history. It's a period that often gets overlooked, but it's absolutely essential to understanding everything that came after. What do you think was the most important lesson Rome learned during this time? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey back in time, please give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next historical adventure. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.